I think that for me, faith really comes in a feeling of connectedness, whether that's with people or with something that I'm learning, or with a physical space that I'm in, or the earth. For me, it's that connection and the reminders that those connections exist.
Faith, to me, is the realization or the belief that there is something to our lives that's more than physical. For me, it's the sense that there's something in between us that connects us, and that reality that is not physical, that might, could be spiritual in nature. It's that sense that we have some sort of soul, and we share that with other parts of the universe, trees and the grass and rocks and one another, and the sense that we're responsible to each other, and that defines to me what goodness is and how we're drawn towards it. And that's what faith does for me, is it guides my sense of responsibility to the connection between all of us. And I think the simplest faith to me is the acknowledgement that there's a connection between us all that's relies on something that's more than physical and less than physical, and it's really important to meaning and caring for each other.
Faith is a word that means a lot of things to a lot of people, and to me it means a lot of things as well, so it's kind of hard to say what I think faith is, but I can try. And I would say that the number one thing that faith is to me is its meaning about meaning, and not just meaning as a thing, but meaning as a thing that melds together the world that we're in and the world that is not with us, the sort of spiritual world, and finding ways to connect those two, and belief that there are connections between the two, and they have their own ways of fitting with each other and meeting each other and knowing each other, even when they each have their totally own processes of existence and knowledge. You know, the way that we think of the world and the way we think of spirituality, they butt heads. They don't make sense together, and people try all the time to make sense of them. So to me, what faith is about is bridging the known with the unknown, and the world we think we know, and the spiritual we usually assume we don't know. But often it's the other way around. We often know about the spiritual and we're confident about what it means to all of us, but we may not know what the world is. So I think it's bridging those two things and having faith that there is a meaning from both what's here and what's there, and that they're connected, and that they interconnect, and that we know what's there and that they know what's here.
Faith, to me, is like a belief in something, like a higher power of some sorts, that you know something is there, but you don't know what it is.
My faith to me, I was raised in a Western jurisdiction of a Methodist branch, which was deduced to me as God was love, and there was a lot of individual duty in how we engaged in our own actions, and but a lot of it was based on helping people and making each other feel like a community. So.
I think the outdoors, and also meals, and gatherings of people like that.
I think that prayer is something that we can do while we're doing anything, and my sense is that the intention that you bring into something, that you can bring sacredness, you can bring your spiritual life, you can bring prayer into anything that you do if you set that intention beforehand to allow it to connect you more to others and to this world and to goodness, beauty, or justice.
You know, I think when I think about things that are sacred, especially activities that are sacred, I think that I don't think they necessarily align with what's perhaps stereotypical. It's often things that just have a meaning to me that is greater than the action itself. They're things that bring a sort of meaning, additional meaning. It's not just, say, making a meal and eating it. It's making a meal and eating it. And to also symbolize something meaningful in a way that cannot be calculated, that cannot be assigned some sort of value to. It's the untangible meaning that I think I really value in activities that are sacred. And I think the best thing about being asked to describe what I think a sacred activity is that to me, I think that the best sacred activities are ones that you can't really make sense out of. The ones that you can't understand, the ones that you don't know what it is that you enjoy about it, what it is that you get out of it, but you know you get something out of that. So for me, sacred activities are in all sorts of my life, and a lot of them have to do with getting to do things that are renewing for me, that are supportive of others, and that in so many other ways allow me to connect with myself and with others as well.
I engage in poetry, specifically poetry that I write, and taking photos of like outdoor scenery. Something I engage in a spiritual manner.
Whenever it's quiet, it can really be anywhere. A lot of times when I'm just walking around camp or like walking home from school or something, if I have quiet time where my brain isn't constantly noticing all of the people around me and like how they're feeling, because my brain just does that automatically. And I have a little bit of time to just be with myself. Oftentimes my mind will wander to like, I'll like pray while I'm walking, or I'll just notice nature, and that's a spiritual thing for me.
I think I engage in alone time in a sacred manner, especially in anticipation of something I might be worried about. Having time to be thoughtful about my actions, or how something affected me, or what would be best for me going forward is a cool thing, and something I used to take for granted a lot more. And so by holding it in a sacred way, treating it with a lot more importance, I've come to create a better relationship with that kind of action.
Ooh. Sometimes, at least in my experience, it can be seen as kind of like silly or whimsical, or like, why are you... I have a lot of people in my life that when I talk about faith don't seem to understand what I'm talking about. I find it very grounding and good feeling and uplifting.
Gosh, I feel like my faith is more about being guided towards goodness, and it has not a lot to do with what happens after I die. It has everything to do with how I live while I am here, and how my life impacts others and the planet. And I wish that other people saw faith or their spiritual life as a way to pursue goodness, and not as a set of rules or a an identity that meant anything besides striving towards goodness and figuring out ways to think about meaning in the world and how to pursue it.
Well, the outside world often has a view of faith that is one that has roots in church. Church being not necessarily the church itself or a church itself, but really just ideas and approaches associated with the church that I personally don't live by or agree with. And I think that there are so many different ways that people experience faith that often the most visible ones are ones that aren't the most reasonable, the most common even, or most importantly for me, the ones necessarily that I feel strongly about. So I think in terms of what the outside world thinks about faith and how it differs from mine is that I look at faith as actions. I look at faith as beliefs. I look at faith as thinking about the world and the meaning of our existences in a way that is often very different than other people of other faith perspectives. So I think the most important thing is that one person of faith is not another person of faith, and everyone's experience is individualistic, is their own.
I think my faith is different than how the outside world sees it is because I experience like faith and like belief in God through nature, specifically like outdoors, where I can like hear the birds chirp or like the rustling of like the tree limbs and leaves, because it reminds me that like we are bigger than ourselves, and that like what is around us is something that God created as well, and it's equally as important as we are.
Well, I think a really clear example would be whenever I mention that I work at a faith-based camp. All of my friends are like, and they're like worried, and their instant thought is like, oh my gosh, a faith-based camp, like maybe they went to one when they were younger and like it was only harmful for them, and they're worried that that's what it's going to be like for me. Or they just like have no idea why on earth I would work at a faith-based camp by choice. What? Because their experience of specifically Christianity most of the time, but just religion in general, a lot of the people that I've grown up with in school and stuff, it hasn't ended well for them. Like they have been kicked out of their churches. They've been like shunned by their congregations, and like there are a lot of things that people do that they call Christian acts that I don't necessarily see as a Christian act, which is why I kind of hesitate to consider myself Christian, because there's so many negative things associated with it. Like, I think usually when I say I grew up Christian, people think of like mega churches on TBN, and that's kind of the perception the world has.
I think it makes me more compassionate and understanding and patient, and reminds me that I need to be compassionate and patient and understanding.
My faith helps me live better in the world because I acknowledge over and over again that the life I lead impacts others, and that I am a part of something that's bigger than me, that's in community with the trees and the sun and the sky and my friends and my family.
Well, living in the world, I think faith is valuable because it gives me an opportunity to understand that there is more to what we're doing here, in terms of there being more to existence, you know. And I think the most important thing about faith is that we get to have an opportunity to think about the world beyond what we know, and believe that there is more that we can't be certain about. There's a sort of mysticism there. And it gives me hope in everything I do because I can look around at what's honestly a fairly bleak world with so many challenges and so many sad headlines and struggling people, and know that there could be something more that we just don't know.
Faith helps me live better in the world because it guides me in like what I do, and it like grounds me in my beliefs of who I am as a person.
I think it gives me a little bit of reassurance, and I know it's the same verses that other people are reading in the Bible, and they have different interpretations, and they use it in a way that I don't necessarily agree with. But the way I interpret a lot of verses about the meek inheriting the earth, things like that, and specifically all the stuff about how Jesus would hang out with people who were considered unclean, or those are the losers, no one else wanted to hang out with them. They didn't understand why Jesus did. I think that I try really hard to be the person who notices people who are feeling left out and who are outside of the group and not being invited to participate.
Justice and compassion most help define my faith.
I want to be sure when I'm thinking about goodness and purpose and meaning that those things are anchored first in love and towards justice. And I think hope. My name is Hope. I grew up for a long time putting aside what I thought hope was, but these days hope to me means that I believe in the world enough and I believe in humans enough to believe that we can change, and that that effort is worthwhile. And hope to me means that we care enough about what's going on in each other to try.
I would say the virtues in Micah 6:8, which is justice, kindness, and walk humbly with their God. So I believe that having justice, not only for yourself but for other people and animals, is important because it helps remind you that even if everything is okay for you, that there are people and things around you that also need to be feeling, be able to feel what you feel.
I think probably love. The one-on-one interactions, I think, where it's really clear that there's love there and that it's present there. I think that's really cool, and that is one of the most important parts of faith.
Do I find meaning in faith? Yeah. I mean, I think that it's hard for me to understand the world without sensing that it could be a lot better than it is, and that there's a big difference between some people's experiences and others. And meaning for me is finding ways to bridge those experiences and ways that we can offer more to one another, or that we can learn from one another, such that we change the world that we entered and we leave it behind a little bit more like ourselves, and that means that there's something good about it. And my understanding of faith and pursuing goodness and justice are really intertwined with that. So yeah, I see faith and meaning as very a part of one another.
Faith is an important aspect of how I make meaning of the world. It allows me to think about who we are in a context that doesn't necessarily fit with worldly labels, especially because of the many biblical examples of how the Bible described relationships in terms of family and friends, and breaking bread with anyone and everyone, and doing things with a sense of sort of reckless abandon, where we use our faith to guide us to act in ways that are kind to each other. And I think that really helps me make sense of the world, because it's often really hard to do that.
I actually talked about this with my mom. She actually said this first, and I was like, wow, that's what I was gonna say. But we're really similar, so it wasn't a huge surprise. But she and I were talking about how, both of us, when we get in the headspace of like, what is the point of all of this? Like, why are we going through all of these things? Like, what is it that we're doing that's helping people while we're just at home in quarantine, something like that. And she and I both were like, well, we can just, while we're here, whenever we have the option, whenever we have the ability to, we can just show people love and try and love people the best that we can.